Chaim. It's Beis Nissan, the Yom Lula of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe brings into the Yom that Beis Nissan, the Lashon is Hilula of the Rebbe Rashab, and he writes the date. It's interesting to note because there are some of the Hilulas of the Rabbeim that the Rebbe does not write Hilula. The Rebbe writes Yema Istalkus or Istalkus. The two Rabbeim that we find that the Rebbe mentions Hilula is Benegir to the Rebbe Rashab and Benegir to the Tzemach Tzedek. Whatever the reason is, but we can also explain it that it's connected with Chodesh Nissan. Chodesh Nissan is connected with the Inyan of Chasana. Hilula is the Inyan of Chasana. It's the Inyan of Hakomas HaMishkan, and the Chazal connected with the Inyan of Simchosei of the Eibishter. Memela the Rebbe in the Yardzeiten that are in Chodesh Nissan, the Rebbe writes Hilula. It was Mitzvah Shabbos Kodesh. Vayikra Leyem Aleph Beis Nissan Sheni Ben Nissan. It was Tafresh Pei B'Shah Chetzi or Revius, which is basically 3:30 a.m. And it says Nestalik U'Menachasi Kovet is Beiros Tov Al Nahar Don. So the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the Reshima, in a letter, a very interesting expression Benegea to the Istalkus. He writes that Berishen L'Seder Zeis Teras Ha'ela, which is going into Sunday, Parshat Tzav, is the Aliyas of Nishmas of the Rebbe Rashab. He writes Kvei Kedushas Amur HaRabba Kodesh before daylight. B'Sheni L'Chodesh Nisan HaShemesh Hugdar, says that the sun darkened and the Rebbe Rashab was brought L'Kivrei, which is Be'erez Zor V'Nochriya. He wasn't in Lubavitch. So in other words, that he was Nitman in a different place altogether, where he ended up in Rostov 4 years earlier. And then the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, says an expression, Oy Rebbeinu Shalom Nirdafnu Adon. The place is called Nahar Don. So the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe says the expression Nirdafnu, we were chased till dawn. In other words, we ended up in Golus. And the Frierdiker Rebbe continues, Yislach Hashem, the Eibishter should forgive me on the expression of my lips, very interesting expression, V'lei echta b'lsheni, and I will not sin in my language saying, Kishom donanu elikim, that this is where the Eibishter judged us. This is the union of Nirdafnu Adon, so the Frierdiker Rebbe connects it with donanu elikim. Vayikach meitanu, he took away from us Ponim HaMe'iris, the illuminated face. Which this is a letter that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes. I think he writes it to his uncle Rab Mendel, Benegir the Istalkus of the Rebbe Rashab. Benegir to Beis Nissan, we find that the Rebbe in different sichas speaks about Beis Nissan and also in different letters. In a letter Tafshin Yud, the Frierdiker Rebbe connects Beis Nissan with the first Shabbos Breishis. Shabbos Breishis, there's 2 days, if B'chafei B'oder Nivra Eilam, or it was B'chafei Elul. So the Rebbe says, Eben soll sagen, es Chafei Oder, kommt to is that Beis Nissan is the first Shabbos Breishis. 7 days after Chafei Oder. And the Rebbe says, and what is different this day than all other days? That it is a day which Shabbos, the first Shabbos, it was the union of Shimsha, Eisei O'er, 36 hours. The first Shabbos Breishis, the light lasted for 36 hours, as the Rebbe mentions in Farbrengen in a later year, brought in Medrashim. The Bishas Adam Barishan saw that it got dark, and he felt lost. So the Eibishter to me gave him a nature that he should rub 2 stones together. And this is the minhag of Beirem Erioish. He was afraid that because he sinned, he brought darkness to the world. So the Eibishter told him, the Eitzah, that as Paschan, Zebazeh, that he took 2 stones rubbed against each other, and it became light. This is the inyan of Mitzvah Shabbos, the inyan of Beirem Yoish. Another inyan Benegeh Beis Nissan, the Rebbe brings, and the Rebbe's father speaks about it, that it's connected with Shevet Yisachar. The Nasi of tomorrow is Shevet Yisachar. And the Rebbe's father explains, when we're speaking about some inyan of Shevet Yisachar, it's connected with Torah. And therefore we see by the Rebbe Rashab that he was Yaseh the yeshiva, and the two sins of Yisachar, one is for Nigla HaTorah and one is for Pnimius HaTorah. In other words, one, the sin is sounded, the other one is not sounded, which means that one of them is the inyan of Nigla HaTorah and one is Pnimius HaTorah. This is also connected with a Maisa that happened in 770, Tavshin Yud Beis. The Gabbai, or whoever's the Balkeda then, read in Parsha Vayetze Yisachar instead of Yisachar. So the Rebbe said, "What's happens? Why suddenly did the Balkeda read with two sins? Because not our minig. When the Belzer Rebbe was once here for Yechidus, the Rebbe spoke with him about it, because by them there is a minig. In Dorten Gufa, there's also different minhagim if it's only the first time or every time the name Yisachar is mentioned. But from the Rebbe spoke about it in Yechidus with the Belzer, I think it was in Mem Aleph. The Rebbe's father writes that this is also the connection that the Istalkus of the Rebbe Rashab was Dafke Beis Nissan, because Beis Nissan is connected with the inyan of Torah. The Yesh Lahoyer, the inyan which was already once sent into the Rebbe, B'negeya to another inyan that we find B'negeya Shevet Yisachar. Shevet Yisachar is also connected with the second day Chanukah. The Rebbe Rashab's bris was on the second day Chanukah. And B'meila, this is the connection between Yisachar and the inyan of Beis Nissan with the Rebbe Rashab. Sai B'negeya to the Stalkos, and Sai B'negeya to the inyan of the bris, which was on the second day Chanukah. The Rebbe continues in Vayem Yem that the first maimer that the Rebbe Rashab said Barabim was the second day Sukkot, Keser Yitnu Lecha. And the last maimer, and the Rebbe is Madgish, maimer Barabim Ha'acharein, because there were a few maimerim that he said privately because there was a curfew. The Mela, they couldn't come to the Rebbe Rashab, they couldn't walk in the street. So it was basically, the last maimer was Reishis Goyim Amalek by the Farbrengen of Purim. Ha'acharim b'yesei ba'almadein. B'negeh the first maimer, there's a whole sikha from the Rebbe, which actually, it's mashma from the Friedrich Rebbe, that the Ascholas Hanesius began to Afreish Nun Dalet, more in a formal way. Mitzad the inyan of Rosh Hashanah Tafresh Nun Dalet. That's when he took over his father's place by davening. And b'meila, this is what marked it. So the Rebbe in Eisicha, which was a very interesting chidush, stressed that be'etzem is in Tafresh Mem Gimel. There was already Ascholas Hanesius. The Rebbe says the proof of that is he already said a maimer. And it's Avidosa Mechanchosan, the Rebbe says. B'meila, it's already, the Nisius already began then. And the Rebbe says, Veret noch, that the Maimer is Kesa Yitnu Lecha. So the Rebbe asked the question, if so, why did he not why did he not take over his father's place till Tafresh Nun Dalet? So the Rebbe says, Ten lechachem v'yech kameid, and the Rebbe Rachmanas got af Nelam. So the Rebbe said v'yesh leimar, because his older brother was still in Lubavitch. The Razor was still in Lubavitch, and Memela, the Rebbe Rashab did not want to take over his father's place. But by Tafresh Nun Dalet, his brother left Lubavitch, the Razor, just a little before, and Memela, the Rebbe Rashab started Dafke in Rosh Hashanah. Und da sagt man ein interessanter Linie. When we look at the Maimer of Tov Reish Nun Daled, Rosh Hashanah, ich weiß nicht, wie viel Chevron das bemerkt, but it's a pelodike Sach. He speaks, the Maimer begins of Achedesh HaShvi. He speaks about the Inyan Kol HaShvi and Chavivin. First page of the Maimer. Und teitzt du is, Chaviv is Rosh Teves, Chochma, Bino, Yeseid, a ganze Inyan of the Inyan von Shvi, which is basically the Shvi to the Baal Shem Tov. It does that machine and that Maimed, which was the formal, with the taking over already also the place where his father died. Now the Inyan that the Rebbe says Barabim is because the Rebbe Rashab said a Maimed Hine Yonechi Keiris Bris Shabbos Kisisa, but there were very few people there. It was the Friedrich Rebbe and another 4 people. It was Weistois because of the curfew that they didn't allow people to walk on the street. So B'meila Chassidim did not come, so the Rebbe Rashab sent a Maimer for 5 people. When you get to this Maimer, it's told that the Rebbe Rashab wrote it up, but he left in the middle, he got sick, he was not able to continue, and he left the middle of Sif Beis. And the Friedrich Rebbe says that the Rebbe says on helfen, that we should be able to learn and fulfill and bring about B'maseinu Hatev, that he should strengthen his bris, his covenant with us, to be made a lachem im Rabbim Aleinu. We should be connected with bris ovis. How does bris ovis come here? This is the teichen of the Maimer. The Maimer is Hine Yonechi Keiris Bris, speaks about the Inyan of bris ovis. The Mela, the Friedrich Rebbe connects it with this Inyan. The famous Pisgah that the Rebbe Rashab said before his Istalkus is right mamish laying in the zal. He asked us to bring in his bed into the zal, and there was today already. There's a fence around it. They know exactly the place. And the Rebbe Rashab then said, "Ich gehe in Himmel und ich ksavim la zichaych." That says that he's leaving, he's going l'mayla, und ich ksavim la zichaych. The manuscripts I'm leaving for you. It says that Friedrich Rebbe became very hisrakshus, very excited, hearing these words, and the Rebbe Rashab said, "Onis pilus, meichen, onis pilus." The Rebbe explained this Pisgah over the years many times. The Rebbe brought out that these 2 inyanim are not 2 separate things, but they're one inyan. There is one thing which is basically the inyan of a Geten Himmel, and the second inyan is the Ksavim Lo Zechaych. It's not like here is one place and the Ksavim are somewhere else, but through learning his Ksavim we connect with him. And this is the stress that Rebbe mentioned it many times, tens of times at least, over the years, that they're connecting with him as there is in Himmel is through Limud Torah. It's interesting to know that the Rebbe says this is the reason why he is referred to as the Rebbe Nishmas Eden. He's referred to as the Rebbe Nishmas Eden because of this inyan that he said Agate in Himmel. Bechlal, the beginning of the Rebbe's Nesios, the Rebbe began to publish many Maimorim, slowly but surely, and some of these Maimorim were the Rebbe Rashab's Maimorim. There was a Maimer that the Rebbe Rashab said, Smuchim La'ad. This was the last Maimer in Anyemeledes Tafrish Pei, and the Rebbe wanted to publish it, Tafshin Yud Aleph, as he writes it clearly. But it didn't work out, so he published the Tafshin Yud Beis. It has a very strong connection with my father, because it was right before the Tnoim of my father. My father's Tnoim was Chav Cheshvan, Tafshin Yud Beis, and Memela the Rebbe offered that since there is a Maimed that's coming out, so the Rebbe did fundraising. The Rebbe asked if he's ready to sponsor the Maimer. And the Rebbe told my father, it's going to be in the libraries, it's going to be everywhere. The Rebbe was thinking very wide and broad. My father didn't need too much convincing. He gave whatever the Rebbe needed, and they published the Maimer. And in the Pesach Dover, the Rebbe writes that this Maimer was supposed to be published a year earlier. Mitzad HaSibbe, it was pushed off to your base, which means that the Rebbe was going to publish this Maimer before the formal Kabbalas HaNesius. Chav Cheshvan Tavshin Yud Aleph. Very interesting. This is a Yemeledes of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe brings many times that the Rebbe Rashab is known as the Rambam of Chassidus. The Rambam of Chassidus means in the same sense that the Rambam wrote his halachas, all the halachas, Pei Yad HaChazaka, Pei Gimel halachas, Klolius. He wrote it in a very clear language, Kakot and Kagodel, that everybody is able to understand it. Likewise, the Rebbe Rashab explains Inyanim of Chassidus in a way that a person should be able to understand it with clarity, with Mishalim. And that's why the Ziknei Chassidim, or Chassidim Arishenim, there's an expression the Rebbe says that they refer to the Rebbe Rashab as the Rambam of Chassidus. In Tafshin Beis, when the Redi Kahos was established, the Rebbe already planned ahead, and the Rebbe wrote in a Pesach Dover, he's planning to publish the Hemshech Samach Vov, the Hemshech Ayin Beis, whenever it'll be possible. So think about it a minute. The Rebbe wants to publish the Samach Vov in 1942. Wants to publish the Ayin Beis in 1942. Chotch, the Rebbe Rashab had reservations about it. The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't do it. The Rebbe was pushing, hoping that this will push it. Samach Vov came out in 1971. Ayin Beis came out in 77 in Lamed Zayin. So it was like 35 years later. But the Rebbe already was lining it up. Bichlal, many Maimorim of the Rebbe in the beginning of the Nesius were based on the Rebbe Rashab's Maimorim. Many times the Rebbe said a Maimer, meyused on the Rebbe Rashab, and he would later publish it. And sometimes as Bocharim, talking about the Chofs, the Lameds, we were thinking to ourselves, what is the meaning of that Pesach Dover? The Rebbe writes that we're giving out this Maimer. It was mitas gechazer. The Rebbe writes in his modesty, mitas gechazer the Shabbos before, and al pi bakoshes Rabbim, it was given out to publish. Who's the Rabbim? The Rabbim didn't even know about it. They had no idea Shabbos what the Maimer is based on. But when damals gerät, there is the Rabbeim. The Rabbeim were made to publish it. And that's how we had Kontreisim, Maimorim from the Rebbe Rashab, which the Rebbe Rashab said, and the Rebbe based his Maimer on that Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab. When it came to Tishrei time, in the middle of the 50s, middle of the Yud, there were many Maimorim, especially Tishrei, meyused on Ayin Beis, Hemshech Ayin Beis. The Ayin Beis was not published yet. Even what they had was just partial, was still about Mekates Ayin Gimel, from Shavuos Ayin Beis to Mekates Ayin Gimel. And the Rebbe was speaking deep in Yonim, in the Sheikhim of Tishrei of that year, of those years. Tezvov, Tezayin, Ken Zayin Yud Zayin Echet, unless it's meyused on a different year. But it was happening then. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in the letter that we mentioned earlier, that he writes about the stalkers of his father, so he writes that our hope is that Schus Kodshe, his holy merit, in the being escorted by the Kedusha of his ancestors, should protect us, and to be able to go in the right way and learn his Torah that he gave us before he left us, and to hope that it will be the day the Rebbe in Tafshin Yud, in the Michtav of Beis Nissan, the Rebbe writes that Beis Nissan has two inyanim in it. It's the Yom Elul of the Rebbe Rashab, and it's the day which the Frierdiker Rebbe became the Nisi Umanik Dereinu, which means basically the Hachtorah of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There was once a chassid, I'm not going to mention the name, a chassid in the 1980s. They were very close with the Rebbe Rashab, and one of the family members was planning to leave to Eretz Yisrael before Beis Nissan. So the Rebbe says, Zicher vet bleiben. He'll surely stay for Beis Nissan, which is the Yom Elul of the Rebbe Rashab, and the Yom Hachtoras b'nei Memale Mekei made the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe's first Maimer was Reishis Goyim Amolik. He was Shabbos Parshat Tzav. He was the end of the Shiva. The Frierdiker Rebbe called in Rabbi Rifkin, told him to close the door, and he said that Tata hat mir geheißen. My father instructed me to say a Maimer. Who am I and what am I? Aber nitztavesi. And he then said the Maimer for Reishis Goyim Amolik, which is a Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, but he added Hagoyes on that Maimer. The next week, the Frierdiker Rebbe calls him in again. This time, in the middle of the Maimer, he opened the door, and the Frierdiker Rebbe continued and said the Maimer, the next Maimer. The Rebbe writes in our order, mentioned on what it says in Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah says, Medrash Tilim. In Medrash Tilim it says that b'mokem shechosam Avraham Avinu Pasach Yitzchak, b'mokem shechosam Yitzchak Pasach Yankov. Also gegangen bis David. Avraham Avinu was Vayitin as kol ashalei Yitzchak. So how did Yitzchak begin his bracha? Vayitin l'cho elikim. Yitzchak ended the bracha Vayikra Yitzchak liYankov b'nei. Came Yankov Vayikra Yankov l'bana ve'osfa v'agid elochem. Yankov finished with V'zeis asher diber lehem aviyam. Comes Moshe Rabbeinu V'zeis habracha. Moshe Rabbeinu finishes Ashrecha Yisrael. Comes David HaMelech Migrin Ashrei Yoish. And the Rebbe actually continued to the Keilah Neshama once, and the Farbrengen, the Hemshech to this Medrash. The Rebbe Rashab's last Maimer was Reishis Goyim, Barabim. The Mela, the Frierdiker Rebbe's first Maimer is also Reishis Goyim. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer that he released to learn Barabim and Yud Shvat was Basi Ligani. Comes the Rebbe, Tavshin Yud Aleph, and begins with Basi Ligani. Which actually we're already talking about the union of Beis Nissan, the union of Chav Cheshvan. There is a union nifla that people don't realize. The Rebbe Rashab said in Maimer on the day of his Yom Haledes, Tafresh Pei. How did he finish the Maimer? He said that when it darf sagen Chassidus, na Yom Haledes you have to say Chassidus. And that's it. Now the Maimer that he said, one of the Maimorim was Smuchim Lad. And it speaks there about the union of Teikef li Smicha, Shchita, Teikef li Netila Bracha. The first Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe said by his Yom HaYoledes was Tafresh Pei Zayin. That's when the first time, the Geula. Frierdiker Rebbe says it took him 7 years. It should be fulfilled. What Maimer did he say? Su Yedechem Kedesh, Teikef L'Netila Bracha, Teikef the same in Mamish. The Rebbe's first Maimer, Yud Aleph Nisan, Tavshin Yud Beis. The Rebbe called in a group of Chassidim, Mamish by name, Sai Bocharim, a selected group of Bocharim and Yungalite. The Maimer begins Hashem Svasai Tiftach, again, Teikef L'Netila Bracha, V'chulu. The same in Mamish, like everyone in the day of his Yom Haledes from the three Nesiim. That's also the Inyan of B'yem, Shachas, and Pasach. The Rebbe writes, B'negiyat Achlotas Teves, there is a Yem Mesugel to follow the ways of the Rabbeim, and Al Pi Avtochas and Nesiim, it is a keli to receive their brachas. I'll just conclude with a letter that the Frierdiker Rebbe asked the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab wrote a letter which was not so soft, and actually asked that the letter should not be copied. Al-Menashe le'yelech b'hatokis. The Pale Mamash was published one time in Migdal Eis, and then it was published in Igros Kodesh of the Rebbe Rashab, Chelik Beis, Tavshin Mem Beis. Frierdiker Rebbe asked the Rebbe a question. The Rebbe Rashab, Tofresh Ayin Dalet. The Frierdiker Rebbe is 34 years old. It was after the Hemshech Samach Vav. It was after the Hemshech, in the middle of the Hemshech Ayin Beis. And the Frierdiker Rebbe asks his father, Mahu Chassidus? A Machidash Chassidus. So the Rebbe Rashab wrote, V'hine me'elam le'shamati u'kimedume shagam le'ro'isi kosu b'achira hazes. I never heard such a chira. B'ksavim yisheinim, it says, Inyan aveda derech Chassidus. And then the Rebbe Rashab continues, especially what I heard from Chassidim, Teiseli, that I never thought about it. I never thought about the background. I learned Chassidus, I looked into Chassidus, I exerted myself to understand the depth of Chassidus. Ubezrasa Yisborech, I found what I needed, what I found. If it's the first time or second time, or I had to exert myself many times, Kifir Ratzon Hashem, but I never thought to myself, Ma ani yesek, ba me ani yesek. What am I doing and what am I involved in? Ani yesek bedach. I'm learning Chassidus. Umali levakach cheshbenas al zeh. What do I have to make cheshbenas? And b'shas I had keches with me, I was able to serve the Eibishter with tefillah, with the Chassidus, what I learned. Then the Rebbe Rashab, I'm not going to read the whole letter, it's a long letter. The Rebbe Rashab goes on and says, where does this come from? Where does such a question come from? Very sharp words. And then the Rebbe Rashab speaks about the mile of Chassidische Farbrengen. And the Lishenes are, Mereibt op de Beiner, mehachaluda shaleya. Mereibt op de Beiner means basically that people are together by Farbrengen. B'meila, one involves himself with a second. B'meila, they talk together about inyonim of Chassidus, inyonim and Aveda. And b'meila, this is a inya miyuchad. In another place it says that the Rebbe Rashab was upset that he never had time, he never spent time in his youth sitting by Chassidische Farbrengens, amongst Chassidim. I'll conclude with a part of a Maimer, talking about the union of Rambam Chassidus, a Maimer of the Rebbe, Rish Chodesh Tammuz, Tafshin Daled Mem, exactly 10 years before Gimel Tammuz. Shabbos Rish Chodesh. The Rebbe speaks about the union of Hoyam B'De Chodesh B'Chodshay, and right after that, the Rebbe concludes towards the conclusion of the Maimer. The Rebbe says like this: the limud that the Rabbeim want is that a person should understand what they're learning. Umagam, that they're referred to as Nesiach Chabad. Nesiach Chabad means they have to intellectually understand what they're learning. And not in a nation of Chuke Chokakti, this is Parsha Chukas. And he also knows, and although he knows there's Taka Chuke Chokakti, V'gam Yedeya, that it was given over through the Rabbeim, Smuchim Ish Mipi Ish Ad Meisha Rabbeinu. And everything they said is true. And when the Rabbeim surely understood the words, B'meila, he knows that he has to be Medayik. But together with that, the Rebbe said it's not enough to be Medayik, but he also has to understand what he's learning. And when he doesn't understand, this is the middle of the Maimer, Chevra. When he doesn't understand, the Rebbe says the Lashon. Dafür kommen und klappen von Tier in Mitternacht. He needs to come and knock on the door even in the middle of the night, because he doesn't understand the Maimer, to explain it. And the Rebbe says this could be the reason. This is the reason why the Rabbeim left it unanswered, in order that he should come and knock on the door. And Bechlal is supposed to be a Yegiya B'avonos Advarim. So this is basically the inyan connected with the Rebbe Rashab, the Rambam of Chassidus, that a person needs to understand, and if he doesn't understand, he has to turn to others, to the Rebbe sagt am Lashon, afilu in mitten Nacht, zu klappen auf den Tier. The Rebbe says helfen that we should see all these inyanim, Be'enei Basa, Bakitze Veranenu, all the Rabbeim, al deras the Rebbe should lead us, al Tzeinag, Yerushalayim, Beis Hamikdash, and Kedesh HaKadosh.